everybody, it's Taylor back with Talk with Tay. This week I'm going to be talking about growing up in a dysfunctional family, insinuating myself as being an adult child. If any of you guys can relate or grew up in a dysfunctional family, you may or may not know what an adult child is. After doing, further research on my own symptoms, behaviors, things like that, the definition of an adult child is essentially someone who grew up in a dysfunctional family and had to change their patterns, thought processes, create maladaptive behaviors, put themselves into an adult role. So, key points about what an adult child is: they could have unresolved emotional issues, such as myself. I know I struggled with deep-rooted insecurities, difficulty setting boundaries, which led different things happen to me in my life, including sexual assaults, abuse, physical, emotional, sexual, allowing toxic relationship protection, I would say, of my father, knowing that he was the villain, but trying to protect that in any way I could. Problems with intimacy based off of all those situational things. A constant need for validation due to a lack of healthy support in your childhood. And I wouldn't say I had no support in my childhood. I definitely would say that I had support. But I do think that there's a level that you hold yourself to, especially because of certain types of abuse that you require validation. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of love language test, which I think is super important. I think everyone should take it, whether you're in a relationship, whether you just want to know more about yourself. So I know one of my top love languages is words of affirmation. I always thought this was like a negative thing, but from a trauma perspective of when you're told such negative things in different ways. I was bullied growing up in an abusive home from my father and other things. Words definitely hurt. I'm not a fan of the whole saying sticks and stones break your bones, but words will never hurt, because words definitely hurt, personally at least. So that obviously kind of led to really hold on to that validation, whether that be my parents, partners, friendships, teachers, coaches, bosses, like anything. And if I didn't get that, something's wrong with me, they're mad at me, they hate me, I'm not good enough, yada, yada, yada. Coping mechanisms that adult children tend to have, which I relate to as well. Using unhealthy coping mechanisms and maladaptive behaviors, which include, people pleasing, substance abuse, controlling behaviors, not being able to manage your emotions properly. I know for myself, I engaged in all of these things at different times in my life. I still continuously working on these things. I'm not perfect, but people pleasing is definitely a huge one in my family. Knowing the dynamic I had with so much chaos surrounded by, I held such a high standard for myself. This is where I also developed like an OCD traits. I think growing up in so much chaos, I was always the child that had so much pressure put on me, more so from my father's side than my mom's side. We all had our strengths and weaknesses. So I was kind of like the golden child in that area on that side. That really put a lot of pressure on me, and I know that other kids that have grown up in a dysfunctional family where they feel like that they were holding themselves to that standards, but leads to other things that happen later on. Having yourself held at such a high standard that's like somewhat unattainable is not realistic. You're human, so it's not possible to be perfect. Depending on the family dynamics, the family dysfunction that this adult child, such as myself, could have been in due to situations such as experiencing neglect, abuse, manipulation, codependency, those are all things that influence adult relationships as well. Being that adult child as a child, leading me to struggle with setting boundaries, insecurities within myself, problems with intimacy, constant need for validation, etc. Another thing, the big one, difficulty making decisions as an adult. Firsthand by myself, that's also something I really do struggle with. I would rather rely on someone else telling me to do something, and then if it goes wrong, at least I know that I, in my own heart, didn't make that decision. One of the biggest decisions, me being when I chose to go live with my father, which I'll get into in a different episode about how that all entailed. But that was probably one of the worst decisions of my entire life. Ever since then, every decision I make is so difficult. When you're a child, making those big decisions with so much manipulation in my head and so much abuse to the point of having to make decisions. Some examples to children who are now adults, considered to be adult children, would be someone who constantly seeks approval from partners or bosses, even when it means compromising their own needs. Just with, for example, if my boss is like, hey, can you work a double? Can you cover the shift or whatever on your day off? In my head, I'm really spreading myself really thin. I knew I needed the money, and I knew like it would help when I don't give myself those resets and I don't do that self-care that I need, that I'm like, I will freak the fuck out. So I won't be able to work my best. I won't be able to be my best. I'm going to probably go into panic attack mode. And I know when I don't give myself those reset days, one part of me should be like, hey, I'm just going to be honest. Like, I need to put that boundary up. I don't think I can do that this week. But, you know, from that seeking that validation, growing up, trying to people please, I feel like it's my responsibility to push away my own needs and be like, you know what? Sure, I will be there. And that goes with partners. I've been in situations where I'm like, hey, I just want to hang out with you. I want to spend time with you. And then I like actually just want to hook up with you, be physical with you. If you don't, then I'm not going to treat you well and I'm not going to be nice to you. And so me setting aside what I needed in that moment, which was just like a companion, I, you know, compromised my own boundaries and I threw that down for that person. Did they feel good? Everybody's happy, even though it ends up usually the person on the end not being happy. Another example would be an individual who struggles to maintain healthy relationships due to fears of abandonment or jealousy. That fear of abandonment is a really big one to me, especially when it comes to relationships now. Growing up, multiple parental figures in and out. I had my mom constantly, but I had my father who had multiple partners. So I had, you know, step parents on both sides. At one point, my father having multiple girlfriends just in and out of the house. I remember I had one experience. I had a step parent. This was like my first stepdad. He was only in our life not that long because my real father had screwed him over so bad, and he was just like a horrible person, to the point of like, he was like to my mom, he was like, hey, like I actually can't do this. I need to protect myself and my own kids. But anyways, I think I was about 3, which is pretty young for me to remember this, being on the place that we had in our backyard, me and my older sister, him coming outside and telling me he was going to work, just gave me a hug. In my heart, I felt like something was off. I mean, I was 3 years old. I don't think you really can put 2 and 2 together with that. Obviously, he never came back. Later on, I found out why. Other situations being when I did live with my father full time, there were so many women coming in and out. My father was always on his best behavior when these women were in the home. He had something he had to prove from the beginning, and you know, put on that persona until things would switch. It would always switch at some point. I was somebody with antisocial personality disorder, which is what my father was diagnosed with, which is probably the worst form of narcissism that you could think of. At some point, an abusive person, they'll groom you, they will love bomb you, something will trigger them, and they'll switch. It would happen every single time, and I knew it, and I was prepared for it when they came in. I would try to tell them, please don't leave, because I knew being alone with him was even scarier, but obviously, they were constantly going in and out. The stepmom I had barely in my life at all. She was one of the deciding factors of convincing me to go live with my dad full time. Then I was little, I was like 11. Shortly after my dad had gotten custody of me, he shouldn't have, but like I said, I'm going to go into that in a different episode. She was out of our lives probably within the next, I want to say 3 months, maybe 3 months. Really fucked up. That was one of the main reasons why I had gone to live there. And then obviously, like, my first stepmom, growing up, when her and my dad divorced, she obviously took her daughter, which was my little sister. We went with my dad, between my dad and my mom, but not having her either. It was just all around, I just felt like I lost a lot of people. It just felt like everyone was leaving me. And then after going into high school and experiencing horrific bullying, everyone that I thought that was my friends, people that I thought cared about me, all were not there at some point, just completely switched up, left. Anyways, that's part of situation. Those things that can lead to an adult child is a person who has difficulty saying no to others due to a fear of conflict or being rejected, which also kind of goes into the boundary thing that I had said that I'd struggle with. Like I said, the time where I was basically kidnapped to go live with my father, I wanted to be like, quote unquote, this peacekeeper in my family, and I thought I could hold the family like somewhat at a peaceful state, especially when you've experienced even like sexual abuse. When you get certain parts of you taken away, intimately wise, it's very it almost makes you lose that voice of that power of no, of how strong the word no is. It turns into, okay, well, I wasn't respected in any way, so why would I even start to use the word no? It wasn't respected when I did use it. It wasn't valued. It didn't mean anything. So I would now have difficulty saying no. If someone's like, oh, do you want to get obliterated drunk tonight, even though I have work at 7 a.m.? I'm like, no, I really don't want to. I have that fear of, rejection, conflict, whatever. So I'm going to do it. I want to give you guys specific examples from my life, because I know I've said a lot of like, oh, this happened in this situation, but I'm not like going into depth about situations. And I know that's what you guys want to hear about. You want to hear what's the tea, what actually happened. Some things I actually don't even remember though. These are just more similar things within my own story that led me to realize like, okay, maybe I was being an adult child. So I'd say one of them would be holiday switch outs. That was a big custody switch out I briefly touched on. When I was younger, my parents had 50-50 custody of me up until about 11 years old. Every holiday, it was like a switch on, switch off. Like I said, there was no like co-parenting. You get dropped off at the house on Christmas morning at 8 a.m. If you are 2 minutes late, 1 minute late, we're calling the cops. Which is why now I think I get really anxious on holidays, because you couldn't enjoy the holiday. And like, there would be that, and I'd be like, okay, well now I'm trying to make sure in my head as a kid, like, okay, I gotta make sure we open presents at this time, and we wake up and we do these things the night before, or we leave by this time because we can't be 30 seconds late, because if that, then the cops are gonna come. I don't want that, trying to avoid that. Like I said, I was trying to protect the peace within the family, and I thought that I had that control, which I didn't. I would say it was my mom's year for Halloween, and she was like, oh, I really want to take you guys to this new pumpkin patch. My dad would find out, and then the day before Halloween, he takes us to this pumpkin patch, knowing that she wants to take us there. And then I'm trying to comfort my mom, knowing how angry she is and how mad and sad or whatever. I'm feeling guilty about this, like this is my fault, even though I have no control over that. Again, putting myself in like, how could I have fixed this? How could I have avoided this when even I couldn't? School events were another one. Parent-teacher conferences, oh my god, those were literally the death of me. Putting all my parents in a room together was not the vibe. My teachers knew it too. There's just so much hostility. It couldn't even really be about us at that time. I was so scared about what was going to happen in that room that I would be like, I have to be in there. We need to do separate time, because I'm like, I really don't want them to have to mesh if I don't need to, even though that's going to make everyone's lives 20 times harder. Other stories that put me in that child-adult mindset, being that golden child implicitly placed into, that was hard, was really trying my best to uphold that standard and trying to find out as a little child what classes I need to become a doctor and a lawyer and what college, and if I didn't go to these colleges then I was a failure. As I grew up, I remember just getting like probably like a B in school, and I just would cry and I would cry, and I was so mad at myself because I was like, I'm a failure, my family's not gonna love me, even though my mom never made me feel like that. It was mostly my dad. That unrealistic standard I had for myself. Or if I was, witnessing my father and his spouses in abusing, I would try to comfort both sides, knowing like that there was nothing I could have done. Another one being when CPS would come to our house. It's so hard as a kid with CPS, and I know that for sure, especially now working with kids that deal with CPS cases, because I've been there myself, so I know. I would lie to the CPS, of course, like, it's all good, don't even trip, we're fine, like, not really sure why you're here, knowing that was probably an out of my dad's house. But I feel like most kids can attest to this that grew up in an abusive home or a very dysfunctional environment, that no matter how dysfunctional the environment is or the family dynamic is, you would rather stay there than be removed, I can't speak for everyone, but I know that that's how some people do feel. I also would say another thing where I was the adult child is when I was living with my dad by myself, I was in charge of all household duties, whether that be keeping the house clean, making sure there was food in the house, or that I got fed, I got to school on time. And as a child, if you have to wake up your parent who won't wake up to drive you to school, and you have to find different rides to school because they don't, like, that's Also, just another example. Lying to my mom and to other people about what was going on in the home, what substances were in there, what was I witnessing, the sexual relations happening in front of me, cleaning up substances, indulging in substances at such a young age. Always making sure, is my father okay? Is he going to be okay? Like, how is he getting home? Where is he? Where's his girlfriend's at? Does my mom know this? Always trying to be on guard about where everyone was, knowing everything. As a child, yeah, that's not our job at all. But yeah, there's a plethora of examples I could go through. Those are just a few. Like I said, once I grown up and went through my behaviors and my symptoms, it was super interesting to be like, oh my gosh, the way that I act and the way that I feel and all of the things I kind of explained in the beginning, it's for a reason. Nobody just does anything for no reason, which is kind of crazy to think about. I've always been so big, even before I went into this field to go to school and stuff like that. Don't ever want to judge anybody's situation, because I'm a firm believer of nurture and nature when it comes to a person. I don't really believe that people are born bad. I believe genetics have things to do with it, of course. I also think nurture plays into it. So it's just interesting how my actions and my adult behaviors and like in my adulthood are due to these issues as a child, all intertwined with one another, which is just super interesting. I know that was like a little bit all over the place, but sometimes it just be like that. I encourage anybody who has grown up in a dysfunctional home to kind of dive into yourself too and be like, hey, is this why I've done this before? Or is this why I feel this way? Not even just behavior-wise, but just like how you feel or what you need. Like I said, as me needing, validation and those words of affirmation. I need my partner to tell, or even anybody, if let's say we're in an argument, right? If you don't tell me, hey, we need to take a step back, but I'm gonna come back and we're gonna talk about this later, or I'm gonna come back and we're gonna figure this out. Anxiety is so much anxiety, because my thought is you're not gonna come back. Like, you're just not. Like, that's it. That's not healthy either. And it might sound to other people, oh, well, but I don't need that. And it's like, okay, well, that's fine, but you didn't go through the same experiences as I did. Everyone has different experiences, right? So your experiences shape who you are and shape what you do. They're not who you are, but they shape your actions and your thoughts about yourself, perceptions of the world, stuff like that. As I grow older, you're able to kind of set back from a more logical perspective and look at it from like omniscient point of view outside of the situation. This happened, which made me feel like this then, which makes me understand now why I do this X, Y, and Z. It's a very big domino effect. So yeah, that's today's episode on adult children. I'm curious if anybody wants to let me know if they've had similar experiences, similar feelings, thoughts about themselves, behaviors, what experiences they've gone through that have made them get to those types of feelings and behaviors. It's really important to do self-evaluation. Be like, okay, like that makes sense. Thank you guys so much for listening. Next week, going to be sharing one of two stories, but next week is going to be heavier. I'm going to dive into the story of what led me to live with my father full time and why that became a thing. We'll just keep going from there. I wanted to thank you guys again for the continuous support and love. I'm very appreciative of it, and you guys are amazing. And thank you to my friends and family, and even just like random people that have reached out to me. Like, means the absolute world to me. I'll see you next week.